So my name is Serene Huleileh. I'm an interpreter, a member of Areej since 2005. I'm Palestinian. I was born in Jerusalem, but I was never able to live in Jerusalem because of the Israeli occupation. I was born in 1966, and Jerusalem was occupied in the West Bank in 1967. So I lived in Ramallah and Jericho, in both cities. In 2000, I moved to Amman in Jordan. And since then, I've been domiciled there, though I work a lot internationally. I work in Jordan, I also work in Palestine and internationally. The way I got into interpretation is very funny and interesting because we don't have an interpretation school in Palestine. My language combination is Arabic and English, and my French is not to a level of C, but I sometimes do consecutive work from French. Anyway, I was interested in translation since I was at university, so I would be translating documents, poetry, anything I could get hold of. And then I started working as a consecutive interpreter, with the International Committee of the Red Cross, with the media. And one day there was a press conference, and for some reason they wanted simultaneous interpretation. So the equipment provider comes to me and says, "You have to sit in a booth." And I said, "What do you mean, a booth? What is a booth?" And he said, "Well, just sit on this chair, put these headphones on, you will hear what people are saying, and then you will interpret." And I said, "Interpret it at the same time? You mean simultaneously?" And he said, yes, you can do it, you can do it. And I thought, okay. So I was really scared. I was sweating the whole time. And it was a 15-20 minute press conference. And I loved it. I loved being in the booth. And I thought, this is interesting. This is even more interesting than consecutive. So I started doing simultaneous interpretation. There was one other interpreter in Palestine, but his experience was also limited to the local experience until a colleague, I didn't know her before, but she moved back to Ramallah, and she asked, "Are there any interpreters around?" And they introduced her to me. She's about 15 years older than I am, and she was a member of Areej, and she kind of trained me. She's my teacher and my mentor since then. And I think I was so lucky to find someone like her. Otherwise, I would still be working in the gray market. I wouldn't have known all the things that I know now, and I think are extremely important. Before 1994, before we had the Oslo Accords between the Israelis and the Palestinians and the establishment of the Palestinian Authority, we could move relatively freely around this, what we call, geographic Palestine, if you like. And we could travel through Ben Gurion Airport, which we call Lod Airport. It was not so easy to get a passport. We didn't have a passport. So we would need to get an Israeli laissez-passer from the Israeli authorities. It wasn't easy to get, but you could get it. It was valid for 1 year. It's not so easy to get visas on this laissez-passer. When I used it to travel to the UK, when I did my master's degree, I had to get a residency card from the UK, and where they say your nationality, I had stateless because it was a laissez-passer. That was sad at the time because I didn't think of myself as stateless. Anyway, after 1994, everything was closed off. There are checkpoints. We're no longer allowed to go to Jerusalem or to Jaffa or anywhere. We don't have access to the airport, which means that we need to go to Jordan to use the airport in Amman Airport. Now, to get to Jordan, you have to cross the Alembi Bridge. Crossing the Alembi Bridge is not just a crossing. It takes about, normally, if you look at the distance, it's about an hour and a half, a drive of an hour and a half from Ramallah to the airport. But in fact, it takes about 6 or 7 hours. And it's not guaranteed because you can go to the bridge, maybe it's overcrowded, maybe the Israelis decide to close it for that day for several hours. Nothing is guaranteed. So if you have to work somewhere outside in Europe or elsewhere, you have to take into consideration that you need to add one more travel day. You need to add the cost of crossing and the same coming back. And it's very difficult to explain to clients. It's very difficult for anyone to understand. If you look at the map, you'd think it's a piece of cake. It's just 1 hour. And you have the Ben Gurion airport. Why do you have to cross to Jordan? And then to try to explain the politics and the history, it's not very easy. So this is why, like, for me, my domicile is in Amman, Jordan. And when I work here, when I work in Ramallah or in Palestine, I don't work as a local because I'm based in Amman. But even there, when I try to explain to clients, for example, if you have the European parliamentarian delegation, if they bring an interpreter from Europe, they get a visa just like everybody else, and they can move freely around between the Palestinian territories and Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, everywhere, and even Gaza. For example, Gaza is part of the Palestinian territories. It is impossible for me to go to Gaza. I need a permit from the Israelis, which they will never give. They only give to people from international organizations, mainly, and sometimes they don't. So Gaza is completely out of bounds, even though it's Palestinian. So they expect us, for example, to be able to go to Gaza. And then we have to explain, no, I'm sorry, I can't. You need to get me a permit. And when they ask, for example, the EU delegation here, they say, it's impossible to get them the permit. So the option would be one, that we don't go and then there's no interpretation, or they don't hire us again. And they have to hire an interpreter in Gaza, another one for Jerusalem, and then another one for the West Bank. And, you know, we have all kinds of stories of trying to get a permit and not succeeding, or going illegally, for example. But I will not get into the details of that. Last year, I celebrated my 50th birthday. It was a double celebration, even though I'm not really happy about turning 50. But I was happy because there's a recent rule that says, from the Israelis, that allows women over 50 to go to Jerusalem and Israel without a permit. So this means that finally I am free to move. I still can't go to Gaza, and there are still times when there is complete closure, so when even I won't be allowed in, but at least, you know, things have improved a little bit for me as an individual. But if you're a young interpreter in Palestine, 25, 26, 30, it's impossible. And if you're a male interpreter, it's even more impossible because there are more restrictions on men than women. A lot of our work is, there's quite a bit of danger and risk involved in it because of the locations that we sometimes have to go to. For example, in Jordan, when we work in the refugee camps, sometimes here when we accompany delegations, they want to visit areas that are a bit risky and dangerous. And sometimes the risk is on us because on the one hand, I mean, we are Palestinian. Even if we have a permit, even if we're accompanying a European delegation, sometimes the Israeli soldiers would take us aside and they will treat us as separate, and we do not have this protection, even if we're working with the UN or any other international organization. And I've had that experience when I was much younger, when I was working with the International Committee of the Red Cross. I'd be working with the Swiss delegate, but they would still take me aside because I am Palestinian, and then I'm under threat. If we're going around when it's a curfew, Palestinians are not allowed to move during curfew, but I am with a Red Cross delegate, so there's a bit of confusion. The other danger is for Palestinians, if they are unhappy with the Red Cross, or if they are unhappy with the EU or the UN, and you are doing the interpretation, that anger gets directed at you. And then it's very difficult to try to explain that you are just interpreting. Sometimes when people are really angry, they don't care that you're the interpreter. They just want to express their anger and to scream, and you just have to listen and try to find a way where you can interpret and keep showing them that you are just a go-between. That's the most difficult part, in fact. The future, it's funny, in this region, because of all the conflicts, it creates more work for us. So on the one hand, we're really saddened by the situation on a personal level. On the other hand, this is the source of work for us, for interpreters, because there are so many more conferences and meetings. And the difficulty lies in when a lot of the time you're interpreting for someone who is saying something that hurts you deeply, and you cannot show it, and you have to interpret it, with all honesty and as accurately as possible. And then you want to kill yourself.
My name is Areej, and I'm Palestinian. I live in Jerusalem. I'm a mother of 2 children, a 16-year-old and a 4-year-old son. I am an interpreter, and the love of interpretation had started with me at a very young age. Basically, it was my fascination with languages. I come from a family where language has always been present. My both parents were teachers of Arabic language. My grandfather was also an interpreter during the British Mandate. I had an uncle who was also an interpreter for the Libyan government, who knew several languages and spoke them proficiently. And stories about them, actually, about how they did, how the interpretation was very interesting for them, have always been there for me, and something that was attractive for me. But then when I was 16 years old, when somebody asked me, what did you want to do? I answered, I wanted to be an interpreter for the late President Yasser Arafat. It was something that I felt was more of a mission to communicate our cause, our story, our narrative to the world, and interpretation. And by knowing more than one language and helping people understand each other, I thought that was really something that I would love to do. The PA was being established. The PA, that is the Palestinian Authority. There was the Oslo agreements in 1993, and then the Declaration of Principles, according to which there was a transitional peace agreement between the Palestinians and Israel. And at the time, it was many institutions, many aid agencies, many countries were interested in the peace process and in helping sustain it and make it a genuine one, by also helping the Palestinians who for years were under occupation and did not have their own institutions, did not have their own systems, did not have any control over what they learned, what the kind of curriculum they get, all these different kinds of things. And so there was this 2-track process that was happening at the time. There was this process of state building, and where everybody was coming in from the Palestinian Legislative Council. I was working, I remember, for USAID-funded projects at the time, helping develop the internal procedures of the Palestinian Legislative Council. The Palestinians never had a parliament in the Palestinian territories. So there were people who worked for legislatures around the world coming in, helping, giving ideas, providing manuals on how things can be done, even the record keeping, and all of this required interpretation. And so it became even more important for me, in addition to my love of languages, to my fascination with the interpretation, to it being a tool for communication, really, and for helping my country. And so this has given it added value. But at the same time, there despite the fact that there was a peace agreement, things did not calm down. It wasn't stability and political stability for long periods of time. In the year 2000, for example, there were events, clashes broke out because of different things that were happening. And I remember, for example, clearly trying to go to Ramallah. It is a city that is close to the north of Jerusalem, and it is considered to be in the West Bank, in the Palestinian territories under the Palestinian Authorities administration. And I remember there was a checkpoint originally, but then with things deteriorating and clashes happening after the year 2000, I remember, for example, trying to cross the checkpoint. We had to go around it and to go through over the mountains and different difficult roads. And I remember clearly, like hearing soldiers firing, and it was a very risky time. I remember also the first time Ramallah was bombed by Apache helicopters. I remember I was there trying to go to work, and I remember the panic that took over the whole city, people running in different directions, not even minding the traffic lights. There were traffic jams, long queues of cars trying to get out of Ramallah, going through the checkpoints, going through difficult situations. Additionally, for example, in Jerusalem, because it is still under the authority of Israel, the Palestinian Authority is not allowed to hold any activities, to hold any events. There was, for example, you would get into an event organized by a Palestinian NGO in Jerusalem. If it happened that somebody from the Palestinian government was attending or was there by chance, the event would be closed down. I had an incident recently where Israeli intelligence officers, in addition to soldiers, barged into the place, into the venue, had put up a notice, an order from the Minister of Interior that the place was closed down, the event was to be cancelled, and started interrogating people on an event that talked about, for example, the curriculum, the Israeli curriculum, and how it portrayed the Palestinians. So these were some of like the things that you would face trying to go to your work to do interpretation. Many times there are participants from different areas throughout the West Bank who are not allowed to come in. You would go to an event, but then it would get cancelled because there wasn't people showing up for the event because of roadblocks, because of something that happened the night before. They cannot go, or you sometimes are late or delayed at checkpoints, not allowed to go to be there on time. Many times experts coming from outside or foreigners are not allowed and are not given a visa. So you have to translate many times with people speaking and coming into or participating into the conference via Skype or via video conference, like the case with Gaza Strip, which is completely isolated, where people in the same country are not allowed to cross and come to the West Bank or to Jerusalem, to that matter. I had the chance to translate at different kinds of settings, whether development related, political related, with government officials, with high-level guests at press conferences at the Palestinian presidency headquarters. These were maybe some of the more intense times because the sensitivity becomes even higher.
Hello, my name is Akram Satarri. I'm from Gaza. I'm 41 years old. I've been working as an interpreter and translator for 17 years now. I studied English and interpretation in Al-Azhar University of Gaza. The situation in Gaza is very dire. The situation in Gaza is a situation of recurrent humanitarian crisis. People are exposed to war. recurrent war. They were in 1948, 1967, 1978, 2008, 2012, and 2014. And in those wars, a large number of houses were destroyed, a large number of people were killed, large number of people were injured, and large number of children were traumatized. What makes the work in Gaza a totally different and challenging job? When you're dealing with the emotions of people, when you are trying to capture those emotions and translate them and make the people who are coming to identify those capable of understanding the exact suffering people were enduring, that's what makes the Gaza context different from any other context, and that's what makes the Gaza context a very demanding context when it comes to the interpretation. So it's different, and part of the interpreters, or most of the interpreters who are doing this job, started this job because of the motive to communicate the suffering of the people in Gaza to the world and to open the eyes of the world about what's happening in Gaza and how it can be probably accommodated. Actually, I don't feel we're forgotten. But what I feel is that amid this new conflicts everywhere, like in Libya, in Yemen, in Syria, the situation is becoming more dire. And with that comes a greater focus on different contexts. Like in Syria, you have 12 million refugees now. You have around 500,000 people killed. You have around also 2-3 million IDPs, internally displaced people. And you have very large humanitarian needs in that specific context. So that's normal that people would be shifting their attention towards Syria. But I don't feel that Gaza is forgotten. Mobility is extremely difficult for people in Gaza. This is the first time I traveled in 4 years. I used to travel more frequent to South Africa, to China, and to different places to do different jobs. But now the issue is extremely challenging, and mobility is quite a key problem for the people of Gaza. The future is for people of Gaza is something that they never ever predict. For you to understand that, I would tell you that in one very ordinary day in Gaza, people were going to their schools. Children were going to their schools. Teachers were going to those schools. People were going to their ordinary works. Engineers, workers, laborers, and everyone. And then in just a minute, 100 different places were targeted in Gaza. That was in 2008, and this with 100 aerial attacks. In this 1 minute, 247 Gazans were killed. So for people of Gaza, we never predict the future, and we understand that the occupation is making our future, is trying to destroy our present and our future. So for me, I would never be able to tell how would the future be like. And I'm not sure if I would be still alive to see that future. I'm sorry to be telling you this, but this is the truth.